Okay, welcome back. This next lecture on the animal evolution, we're going to focus on the characteristics of the 8 invertebrate groups, the 8 invertebrate phyla. So we're going to start with the porifera, or the sponges, and let's try that again. So we're going to start with the porifera, or the sponges. They're called porifera because porifera means pore bearing, or they have lots of little pores or holes in their body. They're very simplistic. They have no tissues. They have specialized cells that do specific jobs, but they don't work together to form a tissue. So we're not going to see any organ systems in these organisms. We're not going to see a digestive system. There's external fertilization. They do gas exchange just by diffusion. So remember, that's molecules moving from where there's a higher concentration to a lower concentration. So as the cells are consuming oxygen, that concentration is going to be lower than the surrounding water, and so then oxygen will diffuse in, and as carbon dioxide accumulates in the cell, it'll diffuse out. So these are very simplistic organisms. There's a red beard sponge in our area, and you may have seen that at the beach. They're very small. Okay, the next group are the cnidarians. And so these include jellyfish, an organism called a hydra, which we sometimes look at in high school classrooms. It's a microscopic organism, sea anemones, which you may remember from Nemo, and coral is also in this group. All of these organisms have stinging cells. These guys, again, are very simplistic. We're starting to see some kind of symmetry, so they have radial symmetry. However, they lack any body cavity, so we're not going to see organ systems. And again, I might keep meaning to fix this, and I haven't done it, so ignore this as repetitive on here. Okay, so they have external digestion, so no digestive system, external fertilization, very little in the way of a system for that. And again, there's no respiratory system, so gases, again, just diffuse in and out of the body. I need to change to my arrow. Okay, the next group are the platyhelminthes, and these guys are flatworms. So they almost have like a ribbon-like shape to their body, right? Because they're flattened. Some of these are parasitic, like the tapeworm. You may have heard of a dog or a cat having tapeworm. They get them from eating fleas. So if your dog or cat ever has a flea infestation, they'll generally end up with tapeworms as a result of that. And then planaria is another group, and these are free living. So not all of these are parasitic or live off of a host and cause harm to it. These guys have bilateral symmetry. So now we're going to start to see the cephalization, or a head, in some of these organisms. And so then we can start to see some sense organs. Some of them even can sense like light or dark. They can't see anything. Some of these have a digestive system, not the tapeworm, the parasitic ones, but some of the free-living ones actually have a digestive system. However, they do not have a system for exchanging gas. So they do gas exchange just by diffusion. So we're still pretty simplistic at this point. Okay, the next group are the nematodes, and now we're going to start to see a body cavity, and we're going to start to see the development of different body systems. So the nematodes are the roundworms. A lot of the worms that your cat or dog may get fall into this group. One of them is called roundworms, but I don't know if you've heard of whipworms or hookworms. Those are also heartworms, are all nematodes. Not all of them are parasitic. This one up here in the corner is actually an example of one that is not parasitic. So now, because we have a body cavity, we're going to start to see body systems. So these guys have a pretty well developed digestive system and a very well developed reproductive system. Okay. Next group, these guys are kind of cool, and now we're starting to get into groups that you're probably a little more familiar with, and that's the mollusks. So the mollusks are in the phyla Mollusca, and so these guys include any shelled organisms, so clams and scallops and snails, and even organisms their ancestors had a shell, like squid or octopi. These guys have soft bodies, but they're usually protected by those hard shells. They do external fertilization. We see that mostly in the water. We'll start to see internal fertilization as organisms start moving out of the water. They have gills for gas exchange. So we're now starting to see organelles to do gas exchange. So the organisms are much more complex, and they need to get those gas to those different body parts. And so now they need an organ for that. And we also see internal digestion. Okay. Our next stop is at the annelids. So these guys are the segmented worms. And so if you think of earthworms and leeches, that's this group. And so these guys, you can see here a leech, and it has segmentation, and these guys have all the body systems. They have this is a body cavity, a true body cavity. Okay, the arthropod, these are the most successful group and most dominant. There's the most biomass of these in this group. So these are examples of these guys are spiders, insects, and crustaceans. In the next slide I'll talk about the differences between those. But these guys have segmented bodies, and this allows them to have jointed appendages. And if you've ever eaten a lobster, you take advantage of those joints when you're breaking the organism apart to eat it. They have an exoskeleton. They do external fertilization. They have gills and various other structures, depending on, a lot of these are terrestrial, so they have other structures for gas exchange, and they have internal digestion. And we can break these guys into 3 different groups. So the arachnids are your spiders or your ticks or your scorpions, and they all have 2 body parts, kind of a head and thorax that are kind of merged together, and then an abdomen, and they have 8 legs. The next group are the crustaceans. The crustaceans have antennae and they have gills. So this would include the crab, the lobsters, barnacles are in this group, shrimp are in this group. Okay, and then the last group are the insects. And the insects have 3 body parts. They have a head, which is separate. They can move their head separate from their thorax. Spiders can't do that. And they have an abdomen. And they have 6 legs. Okay, if we go back to our tree, we're now at the last of our 8 phyla, and that is the echinoderms. And these guys are interesting because they went back to radial symmetry. So they no longer have bilateral symmetry. However, in their embryological development, they pass through a stage where they have bilateral symmetry. So we know that they evolved from organisms that had bilateral symmetry, and for some reason they lost that. Somehow it's an advantage to them not to have that head region. They have a spiny exoskeleton, so it's going to be rough. It could be very sharp and painful to touch. That's for protection. They have gills for gas exchange. They have internal digestion and external digestion, and they have external fertilization. They actually, the starfish, expel their stomach outside of their body to do the breakdown of food. Okay, so let's do a quick check to see if you remember some of the characteristics of the invertebrates. So the answer to these questions are going to be one of the 8 invertebrates that we just talked about. So which group includes snails, clams, and squid? So hopefully you said mollusca. Okay, next question. Which group is the sponges? All right, hopefully you said porifera, pore-bearing sponges. Okay, which are the flatworms? Okay, and that is the platyhelminthes. And the next question, what are the segmented worms? And those are the annelids. And the annelids, actually, that means little rings. So it looks like little rings are all fused together. And which group are the roundworms? Okay, and these are the nematodes. Okay, which group has jointed appendages and an exoskeleton? And that would be the arthropods, or if you step on an insect or whatever, it's going to make a crunch sound. That's that exoskeleton. And those jointed appendages, if you were to try to eat a lobster, like I said before, you're breaking it apart at those jointed appendages. Okay, which 2 groups have radial symmetry? All right, one is the last group we just talked about. Remember, they kind of went back to having radial symmetry, and that's the echinoderms. And there was one other group, and that was the cnidarians, or the jellyfish, also have radial symmetry. And which group has no symmetry? And that is the porifera. So they have no symmetry. There's no line that you can cut a sponge in half and have 2 equal halves. I'll show you a sponge in class, and you can see that for yourselves. All right, and that's the last slide. And the next lecture will be on the chordates. Hope this helped.